Nadine,
Hi, everyone.
hello.
Hi, Jen.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Michael. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, hello.
Good morning to you. And good morning, Melissa.
Morning. You doing well?
Yeah, we're good. So, Dad, can you see people in the lobby? Oh, I think we have 15 participants now.
Yeah, 15 yeah. We're just giving people some time. I was just telling them we're going to give them like 5 minutes so they can log in. Some people, it's going to be in the morning, too early. Some it's going to be afternoon. So I'm just giving people the time to sign in.
That session would be recorded, right?
Yes, it's already being recorded. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess we can start at 5:05 Cairo time.
Yeah,
Sure,
20
that
minutes.
works.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So I guess we can start now. And if people join in the middle, they can ask questions through the Q&A or the chat. So welcome all. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy that you joined our webinar today. My name is Jad Ghalaini. I'm the Marketing and Communication Manager at AABS, the Association of African Business School. Today, this is the official launch of the Emerald AABS Case Competition for 2023. This event will provide you a unique opportunity to get an in-depth look at the competition itself and learn more about the objective, the themes, the rules, and understand the overall experience of the case competition. So first of all, we have Melissa Close, the case commissioning lead at Emerald Publishing, and we have Dr. Michael Goldman, the professor at the University of San Francisco, and we have Nadine Nadine, I don't I don't know what your title is. If you can say it, that would be great, from Emerald Publishing.
I'm the Regional Marketing Manager for the Middle East Africa region at Emerald Publishing.
Thank you. So this is a brief introduction. Melissa, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much. We're really happy to be here partnering with AABS again. I'm just going to share my screen for a brief presentation on the competition and EMCS. Let me full screen that for you. So I believe you can now see these slides. So before we get into the case writing portion of this presentation, I'm just going to provide a little bit of context on why we are holding this event. So this year, we are proud to rerun the AABS EMCS case writing competition. So this will be through the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection, where we will accept submissions and consider them for publication. So if you've never heard of this before, here is all you need to know about Emerging Markets Case Studies collection, or EMCS, as we will call it in shorthand. So EMCS focuses specifically on teaching cases that are based on emerging markets contexts. So these are helping students gain experience in real world challenges in the classroom environment, and also allowing them to test their decision-making skills before entering the workplace. So EMCS takes great pride in the content that it publishes. We are indexed in Scopus, which I think really speaks towards the rigor of our review process and our editorial teams in selecting what goes on to be accepted. We accept both case studies and compact cases, which is a format you might be familiar with. It's very short, typically between 1,000 to 3,000 words, so it can be read very quickly. We are fully double-blind peer-reviewed. We offer payment to our authors upon publication, and we're also very international in scope and authorship and our board. So if you have any questions about EMCS following this panel or this conversation, please do feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to pick up with you one-on-one, but I believe Michael might touch on EMCS a little bit more in his presentation as well. When we get to the end of this presentation, if you'd like to seek out further resources to continue your writing and prepare for the competition, we do have a number of things available for free. So the first is the Emerald Cases Hub. This is an online learning platform that you can go through the entire process of writing a case study, from conception to writing or figuring out what you want to write about, all the way through to the end of getting your case study ready for publication or the review process. So it's very step-by-step, go at your own pace, and inside you will find a number of helpful videos, infographics, Q&A, quizzes, and just a number of things that will help ingrain the kind of key parts of different cases that you need to touch upon. We also have modules on teaching with a case study in case you are looking to become more comfortable facilitating conversation in your classroom, and a number of sample cases, guides, past webinars we've completed. So there's a lot of good stuff in there, and I encourage you to take a look at that. We also have a compact guide to compact cases if that is the format you are most interested in. So this has annotated cases, examples, helpful checklists and roadmaps, just to help you write in this much more concise format, and this is also available. With those resources kind of out of the way now, we can get to the actual exciting part of this presentation, which is the AABS case writing competition. And I have the kind of lucky shoes of being able to officially launch this for 2023. So the purpose of this competition is to encourage and promote the development of high quality teaching cases relevant to the realities of dynamic and emerging economies, specifically for this one, African emerging markets. So if you submit to the AABS case writing competition, you will be considered for a prize fund and also for publication, whether or not you have won the competition itself. So there's a reason to continue even if you don't become one of the winners. And the schedule is now open for submissions. So from now until September 30th, later this year, you can send those in through EMCS. There is a specific button that you will just hit in the submission window to mark that your case is meant for this competition, and we'll take it from there. And about a month or so later, we will announce the winners in November. And you will receive a prize pool if you are one of the winners of $1,000 to the winner and $500 each to 2 of the runners-up. One other exciting thing to note this year is the announcement of a brand new category for the AABS competition, and that is the best French case, which will receive $250 to the winner of that category. In terms of the competition requirements, you must follow in general the guidelines of the MCS, but more specifically, to be eligible for this competition, you must have a developing and emerging markets focus from Africa. You must be written by authors based at African higher education institutions. I encourage you to read through the guidelines in full before submitting, just to make sure that you are ticking all the boxes and that you're not missing off any sections that we do expect. But besides those 2 core requirements, it very much is a case of just follow the MCS's guidelines and you should be all set. On the French Case Award, because this is new, I did want to provide just a little bit more explanation of what will happen to these cases. So if you submit towards the Best French Case Award, you can do so in French. It will go through the judging review process in French, and then you will be translated into English before being published. So there's less back and forth and having to go submit in English if that's not your language of choice. So if we publish both the English and the French versions, that's much better for usability, and you'll have access to both of those options online. In order to participate in this particular category, the authors must be affiliated with an AABS member school, and otherwise adhere to all those same author guidelines. But this one will be a bit more exciting because it is brand new and it opens up this competition to a new community that we've previously not been able to publish content in this language. So we're very excited at the opportunity to provide these resources in EMCS. And to round off my presentation, I have a brief statement from the winning authors of last year's competition. So these are Stephanie Townsend and Boris Urban, who authored both our 1st place and 3rd place cases, as it so happened. And the titles of those cases are up on the screen. And they've shared just some comments on the impact of submitting to the AABS competition and also publishing with the MCS more broadly. So Stephanie has found that this has had quite an impact in the promotion that has followed the announcements of making these cases so widely visible, which has been a really good experience to share those cases and their insights with different members and colleagues. And Boris has spoken about how participating and winning this competition allowed him to kind of develop a bit more into the case writing sphere, and has even spurred a lot of interest in the rest of his community and doing sessions around the case method to help encourage other authors as well. And then we also have a brief statement from the 2nd place winner, which is Amanda Bowen, on the rise and almost fall of Manelli pets. So Amanda has provided this kind statement about kind of the excellence in case writing that's showcased through this competition, and support for it as someone who participates quite regularly. And I think we are all very pleased to see this batch of authors come through last year. I hope this is a little bit inspiring for those who might be considering submitting. Perhaps next year, one of you will be up on the screen providing your own comments on your case and what it has gone on to achieve since winning. And with that, I can end off my presentation here, and I'll stop sharing and I will hand over to Michael.
Very cool. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, hello. Let me share a few slides here. And I see Amanda's on the call, Amanda Bowen, so congratulations on your award last year. And we look forward to Amanda's comments as we go through the conversation today. So I'll just throw in a quick question in the chat about where you're all based. So when you have a moment, let us know so we have a sense of the representation across our continent. So I'm very pleased to share the platform today and talk a little bit about what makes a winning case and what have we seen in the past from submissions to the AABS competition, and what are our recommendations for this year. So 3 areas I want to spend a little bit of time on today. I want to talk a little bit about why you may want to do more of this case research and why it's so critical at this time. 2, really think a little bit about what is a case, what is a quality case, what goes into it, and then 3, how to do it, especially for this competition. And I see we've got Casablanca and Dubai already represented in the chat. And Bobby, hello. Hello from Mauritius and Gaborone. Rafiwe, glad you could join us. All right. Michael Porter made this statement at a North American Case Research Association conference some years ago, and really talking about the link between the multiple methods that he used as part of his scholarship. And so whether you're from Gaborone, Kenya, or Johannesburg, you know that as academics, as scholars, we're interested in these interesting questions. We're interested in investigating things that really matter to society. They matter to business, excuse me, they matter to economies, they matter to our people across the continent. And Michael Porter's quotation here is a good reminder, I think, as we get going this afternoon, about the importance of thinking about a comprehensive set of work as a scholar. As writers, as academics, as researchers, there are many ways in which we can investigate these questions. Case study research that is more longitudinal, that is more in-depth, that is often more qualitative or mixed method or comprehensive method in its approach, allows us to really surface some of the important dynamics and variables that we may be missing in some of our more strict quantitative work. And so it's important to balance. It's important to hear from the protagonists, the decision makers, the multiple stakeholders in any situation. And right now, as we head through 2023, it's such an interesting time in many of our markets across the continent. We're facing some serious headwinds. There are massive opportunities. We know some great growth rates being experienced in some parts of the continent, but there are some headwinds, and organizations, companies, family-owned businesses are facing some difficulties. This is exactly the time when we as researchers, as scholars, need to be close to business, close to organizations, close to protagonists and decision makers in order to understand how they're making those decisions. And what are the issues that are really facing them on the ground? Whether it's an executive education classroom, an MBA classroom, or just a general business management classroom, we need to make sure that we are educating the next generation of business and organizational leaders to understand those nuances and those patterns in markets across our continent. That's why this competition is so important. That's why we're so excited about the opportunity to attract great English and French cases this year, to really dig into how organizations are managing this difficult post-COVID environment, are thinking about new requirements and needs from customers, and are balancing the different priorities and pressures from their stakeholders. So some really interesting organizational contexts as African firms and international firms try and do good and do business across our continent. So Michael Porter's quotation here is really a good reminder about the kind of impact we can make through our scholarship. Yes, it's great to do academic work that is published and influences the way other thought leaders approach their work around the world. But how cool is it to have that work also written up as a teaching case study that really impacts the way students, whether they're in Kenya, Gaborone, or Johannesburg, or Singapore, or New York, or here in San Francisco, are really thinking about doing business around the world, especially in Africa, really the future beyond China and India, the future of business around the world. And so it's a critical time to be studying these kinds of questions. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of the case study. What do we mean by a case study, an EMCS case study, a discussion-based case study, a teaching case study? What we're really thinking about is 3 things. And so on the slide, which I hope you're able to see on the screen, we really talk about the core dilemma, the decision. So the issues that are urgent and important. So urgent and important issues that are facing the decision maker or decision makers in an organization. There are choices. We know from strategy, right? Strategy 101, strategy is about choices, about where to play and how to win. Whether it's Michael Porter or Rita McGrath or CK Prahalad or any of these strategy thinkers, we know that strategy is about choices. Our cases need to investigate those choices. Which markets to enter, how to internationalize, which products for which consumers, which social media campaign, what operational strategy, what kind of financing model, how do we do this business better? These are choices that managers face. So great quality cases that line up to win this competition and others are built around an important unsolved dilemma. The case presents the situation. The case presents the dilemma, the decision, the choices facing a manager or managers at that point in time. Early 2023, late 2022, gosh, even perhaps late 2021. Some core issues being faced by key decision makers that are not solved in the case. The case leaves it open. There are some core questions in the case that the dilemma, that the decision maker is thinking about, and that the students they need to pick up and run with and solve and propose smart solutions based on their experience, based on their learning, based on the content and theories that they're being taught in the classrooms around the world. So that is a critical core component of the case. We see it in the first paragraph. We see it in the last paragraph, but most importantly, we see that dilemma as a red thread, a golden thread, a core thread throughout the case. We don't just hear about the dilemma in the opening paragraph and the closing paragraph. We have the entire case built around the dilemma. Doesn't mean we can't talk about background. Doesn't mean we can't provide a historical context of how we got to this situation. But if we're putting an 8-page case together or a 4-page case together, if it's a brief compact case, the majority of that case should deal with the dilemma, the issues, the variables, the concerns, the implications, the choices of that dilemma. So that's a critical component that often separates good cases from great cases. The second issue on the right-hand side of your screen is about the protagonist. It's about the character or few characters that are core to that decision. Who needs to make the decision? Who influences the decision? Who signs off on this decision? What kind of presentation or negotiation happens within the organization in order to make that decision? We want to hear the voices of those protagonists. Quotations in a case are great. We want to hear the voice of the protagonist. We want to hear good descriptions in the narrative about who that person is, what's their background, how do they approach these kinds of issues, how have they approached previous issues that give us a sense of their kind of philosophy of management or approach to decision making. This is not a theoretical piece of work in the case study. It is a narrative. It is storytelling. And so we need to communicate these things in an appealing, compelling, I don't want to put this down kind of way. Sources and consent are important. If we're gathering primary data, interviews from protagonists and characters and customers and others, we need to have sign-off from those people. We have a kind of default standard consent form, which you can easily download from the EMCS website. And really what we're looking for is that those interviewees or the key person in the organization that can sign off that the primary data, documents, numbers, quotations, that primary data from the organization is acceptable to be published in the case. That's a critical component. Secondary sources are great. It's important in any kind of case that you have secondary sources that provide the context, industry reports, media reports, analyst reports, important market currency, market information, Nielsen, etc. That's useful secondary information, and it needs to be sourced throughout the case, whether it's endnotes or footnotes or APA referencing at the end. Really make sure that those sources are clear, whether it's the primary data or the secondary data. So the character matters. We are storytellers. We are trying to communicate a compelling situation that was faced by a group of people so that students are engaged by it and they want to solve it, and through that they will learn. We know from a learning methodology, pedagogy, andragogy, adult learning, we know that engagement, interest, and relevance are critical to achieve learning outcomes. We do not want to write something that's boring. We do not want to write something that may be extensively referenced, but people have fallen asleep after page 1. We have to make sure that in the writing of the story, in the storytelling narrative, it is interesting, it is relevant, it is compelling. Thirdly, it's about an emerging market context. We are emerging market case studies, the emerging market case studies collection. And so we have a very clear focus on emerging markets, and really all the markets within Africa and the continent and the region are critical to that. So we want to make sure that that information, that context is coming through in the case. If we're talking about a case that's developed in Gaborone, in Botswana, let's understand the market situation. Let's understand the population. Let's understand the connectivity to South Africa. Let's understand the political context. Let's understand the different economic sectors that drive agriculture and mining and telecommunications, etc., within that marketplace. So the market space, the marketplace, that emerging market context needs to come through so that students, wherever they are around the world, can pick up that case, understand very quickly where we are, when we are, and what's going on. So that emerging market context is really important. So those are the 3 key characteristics of a quality case and what separates sometimes good from great. Let me dive into some of those points here with a few examples. Here on the left of the slide, you can see a typical academic peer-reviewed journal article. Some of the work I did with some colleagues around optimal distinctiveness, social identity theory, and some of the sport marketing research, as you can see, that I've researched in my time in my career. On the right-hand side, you can see a case study, the opening paragraphs of a case study that I wrote some years ago with some colleagues in Johannesburg about the Bright Rock insurance business. Can you see the difference here? Difference in style, difference in tone, difference in structure. The research is fairly similar. It's interviews, it's primary data gathering, it's analysis. It's what Robert Yin calls a database of case information, of case data. But how we express that, how we write it up, right, for the audiences is very different. On the left-hand side, we're typically writing for our academic colleagues. We're writing for a scholarly audience where we have to fit into a certain genre and tone and structure. On the right-hand side, we're writing for practitioners, for students, yes, for other scholars, but primarily for practitioners and students. It's about broader impact through broader access. We want these cases to be rigorous as they are through the research methodology, but we want them to be accessible in classrooms around the world. We know that the stuff on the left is great and builds our academic careers, but very few people read it. And the impact here is sometimes limited depending on the theoretical space that you're playing in. On the right-hand side, we know that the tone is very different. It's this narrative tone, almost journalistic in voice, and has a much bigger impact because it reaches so many more people in so many classrooms around the world. And so please be clear about the different way that we write, whether it's an academic journal article or whether it's a peer-reviewed discussion-based case study. So left-hand side, right-hand side. Here you can see another example of a previous case from South Africa, from Africa, about Kaya FM, a media business, a radio business that some people down in Gaborone, Johannesburg, and others will recognize. All right. So we have 2 documents that we're submitting. 2 documents that we're writing iteratively, right, together. We've spoken about the case study document, 8 pages typically, telling the story, built around the dilemma, built around a set of decisions. At the same time, we're writing a teaching note or an instructor manual. The teaching note is as critical, sometimes for competition purposes, more critical, because some of us are really good at writing a compelling narrative, but we don't focus enough on the learning methodologies in the teaching note, on the model answers for great discussion questions, on really smart teaching guidance, whether it's online or physical or hybrid or synchronous or asynchronous. These are the components that are captured in the teaching note, and we'll talk about some of those sections. So 2 documents, case study, a typical case study, about 8 pages of text and a few exhibits. Not 100 exhibits, a few exhibits of relevant information. We don't want to overload the student. We want to provide pretty much the information they require and maybe a little bit more, so we challenge them to think about how they manage information. But the days of the 25-page, our friends at Harvard Business School cases, those days are pretty much gone. And we really focused here more on an 8-page case, or in the compact case, even shorter. Teaching notes could be 8 pages, 10 pages, 12 pages or more. And it is where our scholarship really comes to the fore in the answering of the model questions, or the questions, the model answers to the questions. So we develop some questions, they flow from the learning outcomes in the teaching note, and then those model answers. Almost think about it like an exam memorandum. If you had a question in a case study that you wanted students to think about, not a question for classroom discussion, but a core 3, 4, 5 assignment questions for the case, how would you comprehensively answer that question in about a page, page and a half? What are the frameworks and models and theories that you'd bring to bear on that question in order to answer it comprehensively and rigorously? The kinds of content, frameworks, tools that you want students to learn through that case. We demonstrate that in the teaching note. All right, let's dive into some of those pieces a little bit more. How to focus and build a case. For many of you, as we head towards the September deadline for submission, you may have some cases under development already, and that's great. And I hope this competition is further encouragement and strong encouragement and acknowledgement for you to go ahead and develop and complete those cases and submit them. For some of you on the call, you and your colleagues will be early in this process and you don't have a specific case under development. How would you start? Really 2 areas that I encourage you to think about. On the left-hand side, we are often triggered or nudged into creating a case based on a need in our course. We're teaching a new course, let's say on internationalization or international marketing or corporate finance, and the cases we have are a little bit dated, or they're not relevant to the geography, or something has shifted and you want to teach a different aspect, and there isn't really a case that does that really well. Or, as is true in many departments and business schools across the continent, our friends in the dean's office want us to renew our content. They want fresh cases, and the students are looking for things that were written in the last few months and maybe dealing with situations post-COVID. And so that's a really important opportunity for us to create new cases in the latter part of 2023 about organizations and situations that we have not read about before. So that's the syllabus driver, right? What are the learning outcomes? What are the topics? What's our existing case file in the library? And what are the new cases we want to try and develop? So that's one place that you can start thinking about it. The other one is where you notice something really interesting on Instagram or TikTok or Twitter or our good friends in newspapers, or conversations with alumni or industry contacts or consulting projects, where you're hearing some really interesting stories or situations that you think would be great to share with the rest of the world. An opportunity for you to write something up from industry experience where you think that could be really instructive. Both starting points are useful. They end up at the same place with a compelling story that allows us to teach us something important. So those are 2 places to think about where to start. Contacts are important, sources are important. We need to be business schools for business. We need to be close to industry. We need to, as management scholars, really be thinking about the area of management and managers. And we need to be close to managers. And that's really a great place to help develop some of these case studies. We can talk more about that if there are specific questions. I've spoken about the different pieces of the case study and the teaching note. Let's talk a little bit about method before we start wrapping up here and go into your questions. I've spoken about the research method. There's typically a research method section. It's a paragraph or so in the teaching note where we outline very clearly what kind of data, where did we get it, when did we get it, how did we analyze it. So you want to clarify that, any disguise in the case, financial numbers, names, situations that may need to be disguised for sign-off from the organization. And then you can see the kind of notes, references, footnotes, endnotes, APA referencing at the end that we would need to use in developing the case. I spoke about learning outcomes or teaching objectives in the teaching note in the instructor manual. And these are really, really important. Let's acknowledge that for many of us, if we're trained in a doctoral kind of environment or a master's environment in order to teach, we aren't often taught how to teach. We don't spend, unfortunately, enough time in our higher education preparation for the classroom on how does learning happen in the classroom. We sometimes are forced to learn this by osmosis. We're forced to learn this from mentors and by watching other great teachers. These kinds of frameworks that you see here, Bloom's taxonomy and other kinds of frameworks, taxonomies, and theories are really helpful for us to spend a little bit of time thinking about what do we want the student to be able to do by the end of the case. That's the sentence that I include in all my teaching notes. At the end of the successful case conversation or session or class, the students will be able to do what? We need to move beyond just understanding and think about what the student will be able to do. Now, it's important to think about different levels and what are you teaching at undergraduate level? What are you teaching at postgraduate, MBA kind of level, executive education, certificate kind of level? Those are different. And the balance between knowledge and practice are different. So when you're developing a case, think very carefully about who is this case really best for. Yes, we can teach the case in multiple contexts, but write the teaching note, write the case with a specific context in mind. MBA students at this level in this kind of course with these kinds of learning outcomes. Your adoption of the case, the usage of the case around the world through the EMCS network, through the Emerald network, increases if the case has a combination of a balance between focus, right? This is a brand case. This is an internationalization case. This is a corporate finance case. And generalizability in different learning or higher education contexts. So don't write this for a specific course at your university. Write the case and the learning outcomes for a typical course in a typical university. So you have to generalize a little bit, right? So I might teach sport marketing here at the University of San Francisco. And there are dozens of programs that teach that in the US. But there are very few programs at this point that teach that across our continent. And so if I was going to write a case, I would probably think more about the general marketing application of that for use across Africa, as opposed to a sport marketing application in the teaching note, because I know that although it's interesting, there are very few courses, subjects, topics at business schools across the continent that are dealing with that kind of issue. So think a little bit about how you frame the learning outcomes and frame the focus of the case. Teaching objectives, I've spoken about here. You can see the kinds of topics, what we want the students to be able to do. Critique, integrate, critique, apply, comprehensively analyze, synthesize. These are the kinds of approaches we want to take in our teaching objectives. And then you can see the assignment questions flow from that. And we'll share these slides if you want to take a deeper look. This is just a screenshot of some of the cases within the collection. Let me end off with some final reminders here of the kind of emphasis that I would encourage you to take as you develop your cases for submission. What wins? The cases that win, we've said, are decision-making cases that are core to the case. The teaching note is around the decision-making dilemma, and there's a clear hook at the start. That first paragraph needs to hook me, right? Where is it happening? When is it happening? Who is it happening to? What's the issue? Why is it important? Why is it urgent? First paragraph. If you're not communicating that in the first paragraph, you've lost the reader. So that needs to be really important from a structure and style point of view in the opening of the case. And then carry that all the way through. The rest of the 8 pages need to deal with those issues, right? Not just 5 pages of background and an interesting paragraph at the front. Storytelling, voice, and research depth we've spoken about. Application of research and relevant theory in the teaching note. This is where you demonstrate your scholarship, you demonstrate your understanding of current literature and how you can teach current and recent theories and research findings in the model answers to the assignment questions, right? And so that's where it comes together. And then a substantial teaching plan. Let's think about smart ways to teach the case. Let's think about the case classroom and what happens in that cauldron, what happens in that space where a physical case teacher is walking around, challenging students, drawing out insights from students, having students debate with each other in the classroom. Let's think about small buzz groups. Let's think about group work. And then, of course, let's think about online, hybrid, synchronous and asynchronous models. So we can be great educators. We need to transfer that into the teaching note so that others can pick up the case on a Sunday night and teach it on a Monday morning. Be careful about being boring. Be careful about writing forever because it's a topic you're really interested in and you want to give us 5 pages of background. Is that really critical to the decision that you're asking students to make? Weak and short teaching notes. Some of us, we get into a bit of a habit where we focus on the case and the teaching note we do the night before we have to submit in September, and we're not really putting the effort we need to into the teaching note. It is an equal and sometimes more important part of the package. Think about what are we teaching? Now, there's nothing specifically wrong with SWOT or Porter's 5 forces or Ansoff's growth matrix, but we've probably seen those cases a dime a dozen. So what are the new approaches to growth? Most cases deal with something about growth. Now, there are some emerging frameworks from our friends in strategy, from our friends in internationalization around growth. So let's make sure we're teaching current and recent and important literature, not just thinking about what are those frameworks we learned when we were going through the MBA that we want to teach again. Some of those are still relevant, but let's make sure the application is current, and let's think about making sure that we have the current frameworks involved. Once you submit and you get some feedback, make sure that you engage professionally, timeously, and fully with reviewer feedback. We see, unfortunately, far too many cases in the entire system that get stuck because the authors they're not up for the engagement process with the editor, with the reviewers based on feedback. Let's try not to be defensive. Let's take the feedback from whence it comes. These are people trying to help us make our cases better. Let's think about that. Let's engage with it. Let's redevelop some aspects of the case so that it is more compelling, more accessible, and will be used by more professors around the world. So those are a few points that I hope are helpful. Let me stop sharing here and look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Michael. That was a great presentation. Thank you so much for your session. So I think if anyone has any questions, the Q&A is open and the chat as well, but we'd rather you use the Q&A for an easier interaction. Melissa, if you have any other information you'd like to add?
It was a great presentation. Thanks, Michael. I'm happy to answer any questions on the publishing side of things as well. I can pop my contact information into the chat for people to reach out to in the future. But yeah, I say let's just give them a minute to see what comes through and go from there.
And there are two potential prompts in the chat that we're obviously really interested to engage with and think about how we overcome some of these. We are just so excited to see cases from interesting markets, new cities, new countries, new organizations. And so very keen to think about what gets in the way of us putting these together and being able to tell these stories to the rest of the world. I want to be able to tell stories here in my classroom in San Francisco that go beyond some of the typical organizations that we hear about.
Yeah, if I may actually ask a question to you, Dr. Michael, like a general question. In your opinion, what would you say is the #1 reason of rejections in the EMCS submissions?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Tibatso, for your question. We'll get to that in a second. Nadine, I think there's 2 stages of rejection. There is a desk rejection by our team, and that's upfront, and that's often just not following the author guidelines. One really needs to follow the author guidelines. Melissa shared them earlier. They're on the website. And so, making sure that things are in the past tense, that there's no language errors, making sure that the teaching note has all the pieces that are required, making sure that that opening paragraph communicates when, where, what, importance, urgency, those kinds of components. So the checklist is not extensive, but there are some low-hanging fruit, some important things that everyone has to get right, as we would with any piece of writing. We need to make sure we hit those points. So that's the first thing. We see some submissions, some manuscripts that are underdeveloped, that are incomplete, that are not ready. So that's the first point. The second point, I think, is where the dilemmas are not serious enough. So we really want to dig deeper as researchers, and we want to understand exactly what issues managers are facing. We want to go a little bit beyond the superficial. And so if it's a growth story, okay, what kind of growth? Why growth? What are the real choices? And not choices between an obvious answer and a dodgy answer, but choices between 2 or 3 viable alternatives. And then the teaching note, sometimes after a round or 2 of review, the authors are just not engaging with a deeper level of thinking around the teaching note. So I'd say those are the things. So first up, not meeting the basic requirements, and then down the road, after a round or 2 of review, the authors, the authors are happy with what they've done, and they want us to publish what they've done, and they do not seem prepared to really engage with making something better. I know as an author, once you've done what you've done, you think it's amazing and you just want it to get published. But the value of peer review, the value of the iterative process, is that things can be so much better, so much more useful to so many people around the world if we do the hard work of revision. And so I would encourage authors to be up for that, to understand that's part of the journey. And so many of my cases got so much better after 3 or 4 rounds of review, where I was really engaging with how to write this differently, how to restructure this, what new additional data would make this useful, what section should I cut and not be so attached to these words that I want to fight to the death that they have to be included if they don't add value. So that revision process, I think, is something that's difficult for all of us in scholarship, but it's an important component. Let's jump into some of the questions here in the chat. I see Tibatso's question.
I can speak towards that if you want.
Yeah.
So the question is, it was mentioned that only those affiliated to AABS member schools are welcome. To clarify for the scope of this competition, in order to submit an English case, so those would be first, second, and third place cases in the English category, the requirements are that the case context itself has to focus on the African emerging market context, and the authors, at least one of them, has to be based at an African institution. So co-authors from other regions are very welcome. It just has to meet that one requirement, because part of the goals of this competition is not only to publish these stories, but also to recognize and publish authors from this specific region. For the French category, that one, because AABS has kindly offered to help support the costs of translation from French to English, they've requested that this be specific to AABS member schools as a bit of a benefit to those members. So the translation is kind of the reason there for that requirement. It's also quite a new category, so it's a bit of a test to see the interest and how much uptake we receive. But of course, if there is just mass interest in submitting in French, perhaps we'll do it again in future years and expand that out.
The second question is some questions. Perhaps the nature of leadership. Those issues need to be woven in. Those issues need to be, I'm going to make sure I repeat it 3 times so it's in the recording and not in the recording. Those issues need to be repeated. Those issues need to be integrated in and woven into the case. Now, you can have a budgeting issue, and leadership is not just a CEO issue, it is an issue throughout the organization. So certainly you can have budgeting issues, internationalization issues, product management issues that require leadership. And so you could think, for example, about a chief financial officer or a head of budgeting that not just has to run the numbers, but has to think about how do they influence the executive team around some kind of budgeting decision, perhaps how they ensure budgeting happens effectively throughout the organization. And it's a change management kind of leadership question. Or perhaps it's about how to exert influence in order to push certain cost-cutting issues through from a budgeting point of view. So I can see, Faith, how the decision context in the case might be a financial budgeting kind of issue, but the discipline that you want to teach through that is not just budgeting and accounting, but it's a leadership question. And so I think that's really interesting. Faith, I think you want to make sure that in the case, you certainly have enough information about the leadership issues, the stakeholders, the power, the influence, the background, the philosophy, the people dynamics, all of the leadership issues that that person would need to be dealing with, even if the context was a you don't make the case feel too much like a budgeting case with no budgeting issues in the teaching note. because then our finance friends might pick that case up and want to teach it, but there's nothing around the budgeting. So you want the budgeting issue to be a context, but very clearly the case be about leadership and not about budgeting. So that sounds interesting, Faith. All right. Any other questions? And I assume we're sharing the recording. I can also share the slides. I can go out with the recording. And as Melissa mentioned, our contact details are available and everywhere if anybody wants to get in touch.
Yes, and we will be sharing an email with all the needed information very soon.
Very nice. So Imani in Casablanca, do you have a specific case in mind, Imani? You don't have to give away the whole dilemma now. Just give us a sense. What are you playing with, Imani? You got a case in hand? Let's see. And Bobby's got something, I think, working on. Good. All right. Imani's got something being worked on. I look forward to an interesting case in Mauritius. Such an interesting marketplace, certainly as a financial market and as a corporate market. Really interesting. Leadership is good. Amanda, potentially award-winning case coming in from Johannesburg, right, Amanda? Am I remembering? I think you're in Johannesburg. A strategy case. All right. Interesting strategy case from Amanda for us all to read as we head through. And then Imani looking at the Moroccan team in the FIFA World Cup in Qatar. Okay. Right. Well, we will definitely have fun with a soccer context, a sport context for Imani's case from Qatar. Imani's putting in the chat there on a cartoon case. Now that's really interesting in terms of structure and style. We're kind of used to the 8 pages of typed text in a PDF. And that works for many professors around the world, but it doesn't always work for students around the world. And so we are very interested in different approaches to communicating the story. Virginia Badolica, one of our associate editors, is a real expert in cartoon cases. She's done a special issue on this and done a number herself. And so Imani, that's really great. Take a look at some of the work that Virginia has done. Hopefully some inspiration for your approach around the cartoon case. And think about how the case can be effectively structured and communicated for those different audiences.
And we look forward to seeing it and all the other submissions too. I don't see any other questions coming through.
Yeah.
So perhaps we go ahead and wrap up with some final statements. Do you want to go first, Jad?
So first of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Michael for this amazing presentation. And thank you, Melissa and Nadine, for being part of this. And we're really excited, first of all, to integrate the French case studies with the AABS. And we're really excited to see what's coming, since some of the things are quite interesting on the chat here. That's from our side. And if you have anything else, please feel free to contact us. I'll send as well all the needed information from AABS.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on. Best of luck to everyone who's going to submit in the judging process. We look forward to receiving all of your cases.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Michael.